The atmospheric containment alarm blared through the empty corridors of Sector Omicron, a sound that shouldn't exist 2 miles deep within the Great Library. Secondary archivist Lyra Vance dropped the data crystal she was holding, her silver-toned fingers trembling as the amber emergency lights bathed the ancient shelves in shades of copper. 47 cycles working on this forgotten level, and there had never been a single incident. Now, the south wall of the Omega-class records chamber showed an impossible crack, snaking through material designed to withstand a supernova. Lyra activated her neural comms. Silence. The depth blocked every signal. She was alone with whatever had awakened after millennia of sleep. The crack expanded with a sharp snap, and fragments of crystallized metal hit the floor. Behind the false surface, a hidden chamber, no larger than her torso, was revealed. In the center, suspended in gravitational stasis, floated a metallic cylinder the size of her forearm. Its black surface absorbed the ambient light, and unknown symbols pulsed in deep red along its edges. Lyra knew every cataloging system of the 12 species of the Concord. She had spent decades studying the dead languages of extinct civilizations. But these glyphs belonged to no database she had ever accessed. Her hands moved on instinct, wrapping the cylinder in a portable containment field before she could question the wisdom of the act. The metal was ice-cold to the touch, even through the energy field. When she removed it from the niche, the secret chamber let out one last sigh and sealed itself again, as if it had never existed. Back at her workstation, Lyra placed the artifact under the quantum scanner. The first results made her recoil. Isotopic decay dating, 40,000 standard years, predating the formation of the Concord itself. She zoomed in. On the scan, layers of encryption wrapped around the data core, each more complex than the last. Protection technology that rivaled the Alliance's most advanced military systems. Why would anyone invest such effort to hide historical information? Lyra connected the cylinder to the library's central decoding matrix, programming an adaptive cracking sequence. The process would take hours. She should report the discovery immediately to the Council of High Archivists. She should. But something in the urgency of those pulsing symbols kept her silent. Her instincts, sharpened by decades of diving into mysteries of the past, whispered that this was too important to be filtered through the Concord's bureaucracy. The hours dragged on. Lyra consumed 3 nutrient packs without noticing, her eyes fixed on the decoding progress. Level after level of security fell, revealing deeper layers of complexity. Whoever created this protection didn't just want to hide data, they wanted to ensure that only someone with absolute determination would find it. When the final barrier broke, the room's lights flickered. The central matrix emitted a low warning tone, and a hologram exploded into the air above the cylinder. It wasn't just text, it was a complete multimedia archive. Videos, genetic records, star, maps, and sociological analyses. And at the top of it all, highlighted in letters that seemed to burn into Lyra's retinas, was a single name: Terrans. She searched her neural memory banks. Nothing. She consulted the library's central index. No reference. That name didn't exist in any official Concord record. With fingers trembling with anticipation, she opened the first video file. The image was grainy, filmed by some ancient reconnaissance probe. A blue and green planet spun in the vacuum, wrapped in thick layers of white clouds. Beautiful, Lyra thought. Then she read the telemetry data overlaying the image, and her blood ran cold. Surface temperature, variation from -112 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Tectonic activity, extreme. Atmospheric storms, capable of generating winds of 185 miles per hour. Biodiversity, predators at every level of the food chain. Habitability classification, level 12. Hazard, Lyra had to check 3 times. Level 12 wasn't even in the planetary classification manuals. The scale ended at 10, reserved for worlds where the atmosphere itself was toxic or corrosive. What on earth was a level 12? She kept reading, and each line of text deepened her fascinated horror. The Terrans were bipeds, no natural dermal armor, no significant claws or fangs, no accelerated cellular regeneration. By basic anatomy, they should have been driven to extinction by their own planetary predators within generations. But they weren't. Instead, they developed something the report called adaptive persistence. They could run for hours on end until their prey collapsed from exhaustion. They healed from wounds that would kill other species. They consumed toxins for pleasure and developed resistance to poisons through gradual exposure. They survived in environments ranging from scorching deserts to frozen tundras. And more disturbing, they processed extreme emotional trauma and returned to functionality with alarming speed. Lyra opened a cultural analysis file. The images took her breath away. Monumental structures of stone and metal, cities stretching for hundreds of miles, primitive but functional flying machines. And at the center of it all, billions of those bipedal beings cooperating on scales that rivaled the Galactic Alliance itself. The report was dated 50,000 years ago. 50,000 years, long before the Concord. And back then, the Terrans had already reached the stars. A second video file showed a primitive fleet of interstellar ships approaching an alien space station. The human vessels were crude, powered by basic but functional fusion engines. A delegation in pressurized suits walked through a docking corridor. The audio was corrupted, but the video clearly showed what happened next. The dominant species of that era, massive reptilian creatures Lyra didn't recognize, recoiled in terror. Security scanners pointed at the humans lit up red, detecting levels of adrenaline and cortisol that indicated imminent aggression in any other species. But the humans were just nervous. That was their natural state. The meeting degenerated into chaos. The following images showed coordinated attacks, alien fleets bombing human colonies, space stations being ejected into the vacuum. And in every confrontation, even when outnumbered and outgunned, the humans resisted with a ferocity that made no sense, until they disappeared. The final records showed the last signs of human transmission emanating from a region the star map identified as the Veil, a zone of absolute vacuum on the edge of the known galaxy. Then, silence. Lyra leaned back in her chair, trying to process what she had just witnessed. An entire species erased from history, not because they were weak or primitive, but because they terrified the powers of that era. She should have been shocked. She should have been horrified by the injustice. But a part of her, the archivist trained to see patterns, recognized something more disturbing. Why hide this? Why not just destroy the records? The answer came in the form of one last file, marked with the seal of the High Military Command of the early Concord. It was an internal memo, dated just 1,000 years after the human disappearance. Subject: Omega-class containment protocol, designated species, Terrans. The text was blunt and brutal. The powers that drove humanity out discovered too late that they had made a mistake. Long-range probe records showed human activity continuing in the Veil. They hadn't been wiped out. They had retreated, and they were watching. For the next 10,000 years, sporadic reports of cargo ships saved from disasters by unknown forces, pirates neutralized by technology that didn't match any cataloged species, gravitational anomalies protecting vulnerable trade routes, always in the shadows, always anonymous. The memo's conclusion was clear. The Terrans represented an existential threat, not because they were hostile, but because they were unpredictable. The official recommendation was to erase all records of their existence and establish a protocol of plausible deniability. If anyone asked about the Terrans, the answer would be simple: a myth. Lyra turned off the hologram, her heart racing. She held in her hands the proof of a 40,000-year conspiracy, an entire species turned into a legend to protect the pride of dominant civilizations. And now, what to do with this truth? The decision should be obvious. Present it to the High Council. Let more experienced authorities determine the course of action. But Lyra knew the Council. She knew the belligerent species that dominated conquered politics. They wouldn't thank her for exposing their shameful past. More likely, they would bury the file again, this time with her in it. She needed more. Irrefutable evidence, something that couldn't be ignored or suppressed. Lyra copied the entire contents of the cylinder onto a portable data crystal and hid it in the folds of her robe. The original artifact went back to her workstation, seemingly intact. When she finally left Sector Omicron, the emergency lights had gone out. The corridor was silent, as if nothing had happened, but everything had changed. As she climbed back to the upper levels of the library, Lyra didn't notice the warning signal blinking discreetly on her neural comms. There was a message waiting, sent from the Concord Frontier Command. Subject: gravitational anomalies, Veil region, top priority. The awakening had begun. The Concord's central deliberation chamber occupied the heart of Nexus Station, an orbital structure that took 3 centuries to build. Its transparent walls offered a panoramic view of the surrounding space, where fleets from all 12 member species kept eternal vigil. Lyra had never been in this room. Secondary archivists weren't summoned before the High Council, but she had requested an emergency hearing invoking the Critical Historical Discovery Protocol, a mechanism so rarely used it took 2 days just for the legal department to confirm it was still active. Now, standing in the center of that circular arena, with 12 pairs of alien eyes fixed on her, Lyra questioned her sanity. High Counselor Kalen, a 10-foot-tall draconian with metallic blue scales and eyes that glowed like embers, leaned forward in his elevated seat. His voice boomed through the walls like distant thunder. Archivist Lyra Vance of the Silver People, you invoke privileges that haven't been exercised in 400 cycles. Your discovery must be truly extraordinary to justify this interruption. Present your evidence. Lyra activated the portable holographic projector. The black cylinder materialized in the air, spinning slowly. The red symbols pulsed on its surface. Honored members of the Council, 3 days ago I discovered this artifact sealed in Sector Omicron of the Great Library. Dating analysis confirms it is 40,000 years old. What it contains will fundamentally change our understanding of galactic history. Counselor Zixtara, a crystallian whose geometric form refracted light in hypnotic patterns, emitted a tone that universal translators converted into elegant skepticism. The Great Library contains trillions of ancient artifacts. What makes this one particularly worthy of our attention? Lyra took a deep breath. This was the moment. Because it documents a species that was systematically erased from all our records. A civilization that reached the stars 50,000 years ago and was driven out by those who would later form the Concord. Their name was Terrans. Silence. Then, laughter. General Vorthak, commander of the Draconian military forces and veteran of countless campaigns, was the first to speak, his voice heavy with disdain. Terrans, the ghosts of the Veil, archivist, you summoned the High Council to discuss fairy tales mothers tell to scare disobedient children. They aren't fairy tales, Lyra insisted, amplifying the hologram. Images of the blue planet emerged, accompanied by telemetry data. This is their home planet, hazard classification level 12. Counselor Thainris, representative of the Luminos, a species of energy beings, pulsed in amber tones of curiosity. Level 12 does not exist in our classifications. The maximum is 10. Exactly, Lyra replied. That category was created specifically for the Terran homeworld, a planet where almost everything can kill an unsuspecting visitor. Extreme temperatures, predators at every ecological level, constant seismic activity, and yet intelligent life not only emerged, but thrived. She cycled through the images, showing human cities, the first spaceships, the disastrous encounters with ancient species. They achieved interstellar travel with technology primitive by our standards. When they tried to establish contact, they were seen as a threat, not because they were aggressive, but because their own biological parameters terrified the dominant species of the time. They were hunted, their colonies destroyed, until they retreated to the region we now know as the Veil. General Vorthak slammed a massive claw onto the arm of his chair, producing a sharp metallic sound. And they are supposedly still there, hiding in the shadows for 40,000 years. Archivist, your imagination outweighs your logic. No, civilization maintains cohesion for that long in isolation. They would be extinct or would have degenerated into primitivism. Perhaps, Lyra conceded, if they were any other species, but the reports describe a capacity for adaptation and persistence without parallel. And there's more. She displayed the files from the ancient military memo, highlighting reports of anonymous interventions over the millennia. For 10,000 years after their official disappearance, sporadic records document cargo ships being saved from disasters by unidentified forces, pirates neutralized by unknown technology. Always in the regions near the Veil, always without claiming credit. Counselor Meridax, representative of the Aquarians, an amphibious species with iridescent skin, leaned forward with genuine interest. Are you suggesting they have been acting as anonymous guardians, protecting the same civilizations that drove them out? The data suggests exactly that. General Vorthak roared in frustration. Sentimental nonsense. If such a species existed and possessed superior technology, why wouldn't they return to conquer or demand reparations? Your own argument invalidates your conclusion. Lyra kept her composure, though she felt her confidence wavering. Perhaps because conquest is not in their nature. Perhaps because they understand something we have forgotten. Or perhaps, she paused dramatically, because they were busy fighting a greater threat. High Counselor Kalen raised a hand, silencing the murmur beginning to spread through the chamber. Elaborate. The last file in the cylinder dates back 20,000 years. It's a fragment of an intercepted transmission, origin unknown, language partially translated. It mentions a war against something called the Swarm, an extragalactic entity. The transmission was cut off abruptly. Before she could continue, the chamber lights flickered. A top priority alert echoed through the speakers. The holographic face of Frontier Commander Jexcall, an insectoid whose antennae vibrated in agitation, materialized in the center of the room. High Council, forgive the intrusion, but we have an emergency situation at the Veil Frontier. It requires immediate attention. Kalen frowned. Proceed, Commander. 6 hours ago, long-range sensors detected massive gravitational anomalies emerging from the Veil. I sent an elite reconnaissance fleet to investigate. They just reported visual contact. The air in the chamber seemed to solidify. Lyra felt her heart race. With what? Kalen asked, his voice low and dangerous. Jexcall hesitated as if he didn't believe his own words. Thousands of ships, High Counselor. Unprecedented scale. Technology our scanners can barely interpret, and they are transmitting an identification code. What identification? The commander swallowed hard. Terran Race Stewardship Administration. They are requesting permission to establish a dialogue with the High Council of the Concord. The silence that followed was absolute. 12 counselors, representing the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, stood mute before the impossible. Lyra looked at the black cylinder still floating in the hologram. They weren't ghosts. They weren't myths. The Terrans had returned. General Vorthak was the first to regain his voice, though it trembled with an emotion Lyra couldn't quite identify. Fear, anger, both. Commander Jexkal, what is the disposition of your forces? Maintaining a respectful distance, General, awaiting orders. But I must inform you that the unknown fleet could annihilate my ships without apparent effort. Their shields are operating on frequencies our weapons can't even penetrate in simulations. Counselor Zix Tara pulsed in tones of crystalline alarm. This is an act of war, a fleet of unknown strength on the edge of our territory. Respectfully, Counselor, Jexkal interrupted, they have shown no hostile intent. They are simply waiting. And there's something else. More? Kalen asked, exasperated. One of the ships stands out. It's, counselors. It's hard to describe. It looks like an entire space station, but it's alive. Covered in vegetation, with biomes visible through transparent sections, functioning as a self-sustaining ecosystem. Our biologists are in shock. Lyra felt tears forming in her eyes. A world ship. The humans had turned their ships into pieces of their home planet, taking their home with them into exile. High Counselor Kalen rose from his chair, his scales clinking. Establish a communication channel. If they come in peace, we will hear what they have to say. If they come for war, let them know the Concord does not surrender easily. Understood, Counselor. Opening channel on universal frequencies. The wait seemed to last forever. Then a voice filled the chamber, clear, firm, speaking in galactic standard without a detectable accent. High Council of the Concord, this is Commander Sarah Chen of the Terran Stewardship Administration. Thank you for accepting our request. We have much to discuss, and unfortunately, very little time. The swarm is coming. Lyra closed her eyes. She was right. They were all right. And now, everything would change. The holographic image of Commander Sarah Chen materialized in the center of the deliberation chamber. It was the first time anyone in the Concord had seen a human in 40,000 years, and the impact was palpable. She was bipedal, as the records indicated, about 5'7", light brown skin, black hair pulled back in a functional bun, dark eyes that conveyed sharp intelligence. She wore a dark blue uniform with insignias that glowed discreetly. Nothing about her seemed particularly threatening, until she smiled and Lyra saw the teeth, sharp incisors flanked by pointed canines, predator teeth. Members of the High Council, Chen began, her posture relaxed but alert. Thank you for receiving us. I know our arrival was unexpected, but circumstances don't allow for the luxury of subtlety. General Vorthak leaned forward, his claws drumming on the arm of his chair. Commander Chen, you claim to represent the Terrans, a species the Concord has considered extinct for millennia. What proof do you offer for your claims? Chen gestured, and new holograms bloomed around her. Detailed star maps, historical timelines, genetic records. Our archives document everything. First contact with the Reptilian Confederations 50,000 years ago. The wars of extermination that followed. Our retreat to the region you call the Veil. And the 43,000 years we spent observing, protecting, and occasionally aiding the civilizations that evolved from the dust of those ancient empires. Counselor Meridax swam in circles inside her aquatic chamber. Why hide? Why not return and demand recognition? Chen's expression softened, and for a moment, Lyra glimpsed something ancient in her eyes. Because we learned the lesson you are still discovering. Power without purpose is destructive. Pride without humility leads to collapse. We were driven out not because we were cruel or malicious, but because we represented something that terrified the powers of that era. Instead of repeating that mistake through revenge, we chose a different path. Stewardship, Lyra whispered, finally understanding the title. Exactly, Archivist Lyra Vance. Chen nodded in her direction. I saw your report. Excellent work deciphering the cylinder. It was left intentionally, by the way. We knew eventually someone curious would find it. High Counselor Kalen struck his scepter against the floor. Enough history. You mentioned the swarm. Explain. The atmosphere changed instantly. Chen's smile vanished, replaced by a cold expression of determination. Approximately 400 standard years ago, our long-range observatories detected something emerging from the intergalactic void. Initially, we thought it was a natural phenomenon. A dark matter cloud, perhaps. We were wrong. She gestured again. The image that appeared made several counselors recoil. A pulsing mass of biomechanics stretching for light years. It wasn't a ship or a fleet. It was an organism, or millions of them fused into a collective consciousness. Structures that looked both like machines and living creatures, connected by webs of neural energy glowing in sickly red tones. We call it the swarm, because that's the most accurate description. It's not a civilization in the sense we understand. It's closer to a galactic virus. It consumes entire star systems, processing matter and energy into more components of itself. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't communicate. It only expands. General Vorthak studied the image with the experienced eyes of a strategist. How do you fight something like that? With great difficulty, Chen admitted. We developed specific weapons. Quantum pulse bombs that destabilize its neural connections, digital viruses that corrupt its coordination routines. But every victory is temporary. It learns, adapts, returns stronger. She displayed battle records, human ships facing hordes of biomechanical entities in breathtaking combat. The tactics were brutal and efficient. Coordinated attacks that exploited microscopic weaknesses, calculated sacrifices to buy time. For 4 centuries, we kept the swarm contained at the edge of the intergalactic void. We lost entire worlds in that effort. Colonies with billions of inhabitants, evacuated only to be consumed. But we succeeded. We held the line. Counselor Zixtara refracted light in patterns of crystalline alarm. And now that line has failed. It didn't fail, Chen corrected, her voice hard as steel. We retreated strategically. The swarm has evolved beyond our ability to contain it alone. In 6 months, it will cross into conquered space. Your peripheral systems will be the first to fall. Then it will advance inexorably toward the galactic core. The silence was heavy as a black hole. Counselor Thaneris pulsed in tones of disbelief. Why didn't you warn us sooner? Why wait until now? Because humans have an expression. Nobody believes in monsters until they see them in person. If we had arrived a year ago, 10 years ago, with warnings of an invisible threat beyond the horizon, would you have received us? Or would you have seen our fleet as an invasion and fired first? Lyra knew the answer. They all did. Chen continued, her voice taking on a tone of controlled urgency. But now you face a choice. You can doubt, debate, and question our motivations while the swarm approaches. Or you can accept that for the first time in millennia, the galaxy faces a threat that recognizes no borders of species or territory. And what do you propose? Kalen asked. Total coalition, complete sharing of technology and resources, your industrial production systems combined with our weapon designs, your fleets integrated with our combat tactics. A united front. General Vorthak let out a sound the translators interpreted as a bitter laugh. You ask us to hand over our technological sovereignty to a species we've known for less than an hour. Why should we trust you? Chen stared him down, and Lyra saw something in the commander's eyes that made her shiver. It wasn't a threat. It was the absolute exhaustion of someone who had fought for too long. Because, General, we have already saved every one of your species at least once. That draconian freighter rescued from an engine collapse 3,000 years ago, that was us. The pirate fleet that mysteriously self-destructed before attacking Aquarian colonies 1,000 years ago, that was us. The anonymous navigation data that allowed the Luminos to find that energy-rich system 500 years ago? That was us. She listed incident after incident, each documented in Concord records as an unexplained anomaly or coincidence. The counselors checked their databases, and alien faces took on expressions of growing shock. "We spent 40,000 years protecting you in the shadows," Chen said softly. "Not because you owed us anything, not because we expected a reward, but because someone needed to do it, and we had the capability." Counselor Meridax surfaced her head from the water. "But now you need us." "Yes," Chen admitted without hesitation. "The swarm is too big for one species alone. But honestly, you need us more than we need you. We have experience fighting this threat. We have weapons developed specifically for it. What we need is numbers, ships, soldiers, resources." Kalen drummed his claws against his scepter, thoughtful. "You mentioned a weapon, specific designs against the swarm." Chen hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. "We do. Developed over centuries of trial and error. But it requires significant preparation time and cooperation on an unprecedented scale." "Show us." Chen gesticulo, and a technical schematic exploded into the air. Even Lyra, without military training, recognized the absurd scale of the project. "We call it the Star Trap. It utilizes the residual power of dead stars, white dwarfs, and supernova remnants, focused through a quantum amplification matrix. The result is an energy pulse capable of disintegrating the swarm's central consciousness at a subatomic level." General Vorthak studied the diagram with increasing intensity. "This requires coordination between at least 50 star systems, and time. 6 months for full assembly, 3 months if we cut safety protocols." "And the swarm arrives in?" Chen met the general's eyes without blinking. 4 months. The math was brutal. They would have to work at the absolute limit of physics and logistics with no margin for error. High Counselor Kalen rose, his presence dominating the chamber. "Commander Chen, the Concord will deliberate on your proposal. You will have our answer in 6 standard hours." Chen nodded, but before the hologram disconnected, she added one last thing. "Counselors, one final observation. Humans have another saying, hope is not a strategy, but the courage to act in the face of the impossible can be. You have 6 hours to decide if you are brave enough." The image vanished. Lyra looked at the counselors, seeing doubt and fear fighting pride and skepticism on alien faces. The fate of the galaxy would be decided by politics. The 6 hours dragged on like 6 years. Lyra remained in the antechamber adjacent to the deliberation chamber, technically dismissed but unable to leave. Through the transparent walls, she watched the human fleet maintaining a respectful position beyond the Concord's official border. The world ship was even more impressive up close. Entire forests grew on its curved surface, protected by invisible atmospheric shields. Rivers snaked between structures that looked both organic and built. It was home, fortress, and statement in a single impossible form. "Fascinating, isn't it?" Lyra turned. Counselor Meridax had left the deliberation chamber, her amphibious form glistening wet under the station lights. "Counselor, I shouldn't be here." "Nonsense. You started this with your discovery. You deserve to witness how it ends." Meridax approached the window, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the distant fleet. "Do you know what the most disturbing part is? It's not their technological power. It's not the evidence that they've protected us for millennia. It's the humility." "How so?" "They could have returned as conquerors. They had the power. They had the moral justification. Their ancestors were hunted and driven out for non-existent crimes. But instead of revenge, they chose to be guardians. That speaks of a cultural maturity that we, with all our supposed civilization, have yet to reach." Lyra thought of the records she had deciphered. The brutal persistence of humans. The ability to survive the impossible. Perhaps it's because they came from a world that was constantly trying to kill them. They learned that survival requires cooperation, not domination. Or, Meridax suggested softly, perhaps they learned through suffering what we learn through privilege. And lessons learned in pain tend to last longer. A sharp tone interrupted the conversation. The chamber doors opened. The counselors emerged, their expressions ranging from resolution to ill-disguised reluctance. High Counselor Kalen activated a wide-range communicator. Commander Chen, the High Council of the Concord has reached a decision. The image of the commander materialized instantly, as if she had never stopped monitoring the channel. I'm listening, High Counselor. We accept your proposal for a coalition. Concord resources will be made available for the joint defense against the swarm. Integrated fleets, technological sharing, full logistical coordination. Chen didn't smile, but Lyra detected relief in her eyes. You made the right choice. We will begin integration immediately. I will send liaison teams to each member world within 12 hours. There are conditions, Kalen continued, his voice hard. Concord delegations will have full access to your facilities, total transparency, and after the threat is neutralized, we will renegotiate the terms of this alliance. Accepted. Transparency in both directions. And Counselor, thank you. I know this wasn't easy. Make no mistake, Commander, we do this out of necessity, not trust. Prove that this partnership is worth our risk. Chen nodded solemnly. We will. The following weeks were a storm of unprecedented activity. Lyra, due to her initial role, was designated as the official observer of human integration. What she witnessed fundamentally transformed her understanding of what it meant to be human. The first thing she noticed was efficiency. Human engineering teams arrived at conquered facilities and immediately began analysis. They didn't wait for bureaucratic authorizations. They didn't waste time with formalities. They identified problems and implemented solutions with alarming speed. In a Crystallian production station, she watched humans optimizing assembly lines that had operated the same way for 1,000 years. They introduced concepts the Crystallians considered impossible. Modular production lines, just-in-time manufacturing, adaptive redundancy. How do you know this will work? Asked the Crystallian supervisor, his light patterns blinking in confusion. Chief Engineer Maria Rodriguez, a short woman with graying hair and calloused hands, adjusted her glasses. Because we've already failed in every way possible and learned from every failure. You have the luxury of 1,000 years of stability. We had 40,000 years learning to fix what breaks under pressure. And it worked. Production doubled in a week, tripled in 2. But it wasn't just engineering. Lyra observed humans integrating socially in ways other species struggled to understand. In a draconian command center, she watched a young human lieutenant named James, Park teaching combat tactics to veteran officers. The Draconians were born warriors, raised in martial cultures that glorified strength and honor. They should have resisted instructions from a rookie of an unknown species, but Park didn't instruct them. He learned first. "Show me your standard combat formation," he asked. The Draconians demonstrated dense beam formations, optimized to maximize concentrated firepower. Impressive, Park observed genuinely. Against fortified targets, that's devastating. But against the swarm, which operates through numbers rather than defended positions, we need something different. He sketched out dispersed formations, hit-and-run tactics, the use of spatial terrain for emboscadas. I'm not saying your way is wrong. I'm saying the enemy doesn't play by the same rules. We need to be water, not rock. A Draconian general, veteran of 50 campaigns, studied the diagrams. This requires trusting that your squad mates will hold position without direct visual contact. It requires discipline beyond instinct. Yes, Park agreed. "And I've seen Draconians hold the battle line against impossible odds. If anyone can make this work, it's you." He appealed to their pride without diminishing them. He recognized strength while molding it for a new purpose. Within 2 weeks, human tactics were standard in Draconian fleets. Lyra saw this pattern repeat across all species. Humans didn't impose, they adapted. They found what each culture valued and built bridges from there. With the Luminos, beings of pure energy, humans developed interfaces that allowed direct mind-to-machine communication, eliminating translation delays in combat. With the Aquarians, they designed hybrid life support systems that allowed joint operations in environments impossible for any species alone. With the Silver People, archivists like Lyra, they created distributed databases that would preserve all galactic knowledge, even if entire worlds fell. But it was during a visit to the world ship that Lyra truly understood what made humans different. Commander Chen invited her personally, offering a tour of normally restricted sectors. They walked through artificial forests where human children played under centuries-old trees. They passed laboratories where scientists worked side by side with advanced AIs. They visited memorials where the names of lost worlds were engraved in black stone. "This is what we carry with us," Chen explained, gesturing to the life around them. "Not just technology or weapons, but the memory that we are more than war, that it's worth protecting not just survival, but what makes life worth living." They stopped at an observatory where the galaxy stretched out in infinite splendor. "Archivist Lyra Vance, may I ask a question?" "Of course, Commander." "Why did you risk your career revealing the cylinder? It would have been easier to bury it again." Lyra considered the question carefully. "Because the truth matters. Because forgotten history is history destined to repeat itself. And because, on some level, I believe that if your species survived 40,000 years against all odds, maybe there was a reason for hope." Chen smiled, and this time there was no predation in those teeth, just humanity. "Then we are alike, you and I. We both believe that knowledge is the key to a better future." "And if it's not enough?" Lyra asked in a low voice. "What if the swarm is too strong? Then we will die knowing we tried, that we faced the impossible with courage instead of surrendering to fear. And if there is life after death, our ancestors will say we honored their sacrifice." Chen pointed to a particular star shining blue-white in the distance. "That is Sul, our home star. Nearly 50,000 years ago, my ancestors looked at the night sky and wondered what was beyond. Now we are here, protecting worlds that don't even know we exist. That fills me with pride in a way a military victory never could." Lyra followed the commander's gaze, imagining that distant, deadly world where humans learned to survive against all odds. "Do you think we'll win?" Chen didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice carried the weight of centuries of war. "Archivist, I've learned not to make predictions about war. But I know this. If we're going down fighting, and we'll take the swarm with us into the void." At that moment, alarms echoed through the world ship. The voice of the communications officer sounded over the speakers. "Commander Chen to the command center. We have contact with the swarm's vanguard, Gamma Sector Peripheral Systems, requesting immediate orders." Chen was already running before the announcement finished. The preparation time was over. The war had begun. The world ship's command center pulsed with controlled activity. Dozens of species worked side by side at holographic stations, translating sensor data into tactical intelligence. Lyra watched from an elevated platform, authorized to witness, but not interfere. In the center of the room, a three-dimensional projection showed the Gamma Sector. 3 peripheral star systems glowed in amber alert. And advancing toward them, like an implacable tide, came the swarm. It was worse than any simulation could prepare for. Millions of biomechanical entities, each the size of a warship, moving in perfect coordination. There was no recognizable tactical formation, just irresistible mass. "Projections," Commander Chen ordered, her voice calm despite the gravity. A Luminos analyst pulsed in tones of alarm. "If they maintain current speed, they will reach the first inhabited world in 42 hours. Population, 300 million Aquarians. Evacuation capacity, 25% in the time available." The silence that followed was heavy. Chen closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and opened them with steel resolution. "We will not evacuate. We will defend." General Vorthak, connected via communication link from his flagship, roared in protest. "Commander, with all respect, the numbers don't lie. Even with combined fleets, we are outnumbered at least 100 to 1. Defending is suicide." "Perhaps," Chen admitted. "But abandoning 300 million without a fight would send the wrong message. To our own forces and to the swarm, we need to show that every inch of space will be contested, that we won't retreat without a cost." She zoomed in on the projection, highlighting strategic points. "We have advantages that pure numbers don't capture. We know the terrain, we can use asteroid fields, gravitational anomalies, stellar radiation, and we have something the swarm doesn't." "What?" asked a Crystallian officer. Chen smiled, predatory. "Rage. Every species in this room has worlds to protect, families to defend. The swarm only consumes. We fight for something greater than survival. We fight for a future." She traced attack routes on the projection. "Right here, in the asteroid belt of the Titan system. We've rigged every rock with antimatter charges. When the swarm moves in, we trigger a chain reaction. It won't wipe out the main force, but it'll slow them down and create a debris field that messes with their neural link." General Vance studied the strategy, his scales clicking as he thought. "And then we fall back to the second line right here, where the radiation from the Phoenix red giant interferes with their sensors. Fast attack fleets will use hit-and-run tactics. Strike, retreat, strike again. We wear them down instead of taking them head-on." "What about the star trap?" asked Counselor Meredith, who had just arrived at the command center. 43% complete. We need 3 more weeks. Every day we buy here is 1 day closer to that weapon being online." Miller looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every species commander. "I'm going to be blunt. This battle will cost lives. Ships will be lost. Some of us won't make it back, but if we give the swarm an easy path, they'll sweep through the galaxy in months. We need to make them bleed for every single system." Vance slammed a claw against his console, a traditional gesture of agreement. "Then they will bleed. My fleets are ready." "Ours too," the other commanders echoed, one by one. Miller nodded, satisfied. "Battle stations in 6 hours. May whatever gods you believe in watch over us." The battle for the Titan system began exactly as Miller had planned. The swarm entered the asteroid belt in a dense formation, relying on sheer numbers to push through any obstacle. The detonations were simultaneous. 2,000 rigged asteroids exploded in a massive chain reaction, releasing energy equivalent to small supernovas. Space lit up in a blinding white flash. As the radiation cleared, Lyra watched the sensors with growing hope. Roughly 15% of the enemy vanguard had been vaporized. Debris spun in chaotic orbits, creating a hazard zone that should have forced the rest to change course. But the swarm didn't turn. They kept pushing through the wreckage, processing their own dead into biomechanical shields. Their neural coordination adapted in real time, learning from the tactic. "Phase 2, Miller ordered, her voice tense but steady. Fast attack fleets emerged from the shadow of the red giant. Small squads of ships moving in perfect sync. They didn't hit the main mass. They targeted the neural nodes Miller had identified as control points. Quantum pulse. Missiles hit with surgical precision. Biomechanical entities lost coordination, slamming into each other. But for every node destroyed, 3 new ones formed, adapting to the strategy. "They're learning too fast," observed the tactical officer, Lieutenant Parker. "Every attack is becoming less effective." "Then we change tactics," Miller replied. "Activate the experimental payload, Project Digital Virus." Lyra watched as code was transmitted on the neural frequencies the swarm used for coordination. These weren't physical attacks. They were information invasions, viruses designed to corrupt the enemy's own command routines. It worked spectacularly for about 30 seconds. Entire sections of the swarm went haywire, attacking one another. Then the collective consciousness identified the breach, isolated the infected segments, and ejected them into the vacuum like cancer cells. "Resistance learned," Parker muttered. "They sacrificed parts of themselves to save the whole." Miller watched the battlefield with a grim expression. Strategies that took centuries to develop were becoming obsolete in minutes. The swarm wasn't just reacting, it was evolving. All units, fall back to final positions. Prepare to defend the planet directly. The following hours were a nightmare of attrition. The Alliance fleets formed a defensive perimeter around the planet, engaging the swarm in a desperate struggle. Ships vanished in silent fireballs, shields buckled under the relentless bombardment. But the line held. Lyra watched the soldiers performing maneuvers that should have been suicidal, using their own hulls as shields to protect evacuation transports. She saw the energy beings overloading their cores to generate pulses that broke up enemy clusters. She saw the humans coordinating everything, adjusting tactics in real time while maintaining an impossible calm. And she saw sacrifice. A heavily damaged human frigate veered off course to intercept a biomechanical dreadnought closing in on the planet. The captain, a white-haired woman Lyra recognized as Admiral Sarah Taylor, broadcast one last message. "To the entire fleet, it's been an honor serving with you. Keep fighting. Win." The frigate slammed into the dreadnought at near light speed. The resulting explosion lit up the entire system. Silence fell over the command center. Then, General Vance spoke, his voice raspy with an emotion his kind rarely showed. "She was a true warrior. She will be remembered." "They all will," Miller said softly. "Every sacrifice buys us time. Every second counts." The battle dragged on for 3 days. 3 days of non-stop combat where sleep was a luxury and exhaustion was the norm. But when the swarm finally pulled back, not in defeat, but to reassess, the line had held. The planet had survived. 70% of the population had been evacuated safely. The remaining 30% were protected by a defensive orbital that had, miraculously, stayed standing. But the cost was brutal. 30% of the fleet was gone. Thousands of lives lost, and the swarm had only retreated. They hadn't been beaten. In the command center, Miller studied the damage reports with an exhausted look. Lyra approached her hesitantly. "Commander, you need to rest." Miller looked at her, and for the first time, Lyra saw the depth of the weariness in those eyes. It wasn't just from this battle, it was from 400 years of war. "I can't. The swarm doesn't rest, and every hour I lose is an hour they use to adapt. You're human, not a machine. Even you have limits." Miller let out a hollow laugh. "You'd be surprised what humans can endure when there's no other choice. But you're right, 6 hours of rest. Then we're back at it." She started toward her quarters but stopped at the door. "Archivist Lyra, can I ask a favor?" "Anything, if we don't survive what's coming next. Make sure the truth is recorded. Not just the war, but why we fought. So future generations understand that civilization is worth defending, even against impossible odds." Lyra felt tears welling in her silver eyes. "You will survive, Commander. You all will. I believe that." Miller smiled, sad but genuine. "Hope is a beautiful thing, Lyra. Hold on to it. Sometimes it's all we have." When Miller left, Lyra turned back to the holographic projection showing the swarm's position. The main mass was still moving forward, as relentless as a tidal wave. But now, there was a hesitation in their movements. Caution. They had made the swarm bleed. Not much, but enough to prove that resistance was possible. And in 3 weeks, if they survived long enough, the star trap would be ready. Lyra began to document everything, every battle, every sacrifice, every moment of courage. Because if there was one thing she had learned from the humans, it was that history mattered. And this story, of different species coming together against the impossible, deserved to be remembered forever. 21 days. That was how long they managed to hold. 21 days of non-stop battles, strategic retreats, and sacrifices that would make future generations weep. But the star trap was finally complete. Lyra watched from the bridge of the world ship as the joint fleet took their positions in the Edge Corridor, a region of space where 3 white dwarfs formed a perfect gravitational triangle. In the center of that triangle, engineers from 12 species had built something magnificent and terrifying. The amplification array stretched for thousands of miles, webs of superconducting material connecting massive energy collectors. Each white dwarf was encased in a collection ring, slowly draining the residual power of dead stars. At the heart of the array, a crystal the size of a small moon pulsed with contained energy. "Charge status," Commander Miller requested, deep circles under her eyes, but her voice steady. 87%, replied Dr. Jane Foster, the project's lead physicist. "We need at least 95 to guarantee we penetrate the swarm's central consciousness. 3 hours at the current rate. And the swarm?" Lieutenant Parker checked the long-range sensors, his expression grim. 2 systems away. They've identified the array as a threat. They're accelerating." Miller tapped her fingers against the console, calculating the odds. "How long until they get here?" 2 hours and 40 minutes. The silence that fell over the bridge was as heavy as a black hole. They needed 3 hours. They had less than 3. The math was unforgiving. General Vance, stationed on his flagship at the defensive perimeter, broke the silence with a voice that rang with absolute determination. "Then we will give you 3 hours, whatever the cost." Miller closed her eyes briefly, then nodded. "All fleets, form a defensive line. Absolute priority. Protect the array. Nothing gets through." Lyra watched the deployment through the sensors and felt her heart tighten. 1,000 ships from 12 different species stood as a barrier between the swarm and the star trap. 1,000 ships against millions of biomechanical entities. The odds were impossible, but impossible had never stopped humans before. The swarm's vanguard emerged from hyperspace like a nightmare made real, a pulsing mass of biomechanics that stretched beyond the limits of the sensors. They didn't attack immediately. They watched, analyzing the defensive formation with an alien intelligence that processed strategy on levels biological brains could barely grasp. Then they charged. The first impact was brutal. Energy weapons sliced through the vacuum across every frequency of the spectrum. Missiles detonated in cascades of antimatter. Space turned into a tapestry of light and destruction. Vance's fleets held the center of the line, his warships taking punishment that should have pulverized them while firing back with plasma cannons that vaporized hundreds of entities per shot. The Aquarians flanked them, using their superior mobility to carry out surgical strikes on command nodes before retreating before the retaliation could hit. The energy beings provided power support, their bodies of pure light transferring energy to failing shields and repairing damaged systems in real time. And the humans coordinated it all, their minds processing data from thousands of sources, simultaneously adjusting tactics second by second. But the swarm was no ordinary enemy. They learned from every engagement. Tactics that worked once became useless the next time, and eventually numbers would overcome skill. Lyra saw the first gap open in the defensive line when a squadron was overwhelmed. Biomechanical entities flowed through the opening like water through a crack. "Delta Squad, plug that gap," Miller ordered. Human frigates accelerated into position, pouring out suppressive fire. The gap closed, but it cost them 6 ships. "Charge status," Miller asked, her voice tight. 91%, 2 minutes left. On the battle line, General Vance was pulling a maneuver that defied both physics and sanity. His dreadnought, already heavily damaged, accelerated directly into a massive cluster of enemy entities. His cannons fired in every direction, creating a zone of destruction around him. "General, your shields are at 5%, an officer warned. "Then I'll use the hull," Vance replied, his voice full of battle lust. "Not one step back." Soldiers all along the line echoed the war cry. Not one step back. Counselor Meredith, commanding the Aquarian flotilla, was executing an attack pattern she had never dreamed possible. Her ships danced between enemy fire with a precision that defied probability, every move calculated to maximize damage while minimizing exposure. But even art had its limits. One of her ships was hit, its shields collapsing. Instead of retreating, the captain steered the ship directly into a major neural node. "For the world's yet to be born," the captain broadcasted, seconds before impact. The explosion destabilized an entire section of the enemy formation. Lyra documented it all, tears streaming down her silver face. Every sacrifice, every act of courage that transcended the instinct to survive. This was what civilization meant. Not technology or power, but the will to risk everything for something greater. 94%, Dr. Foster announced. 30 seconds. The swarm recognized the threat. All of its attention turned toward the array. Trillions of entities converged in a coordinated strike meant to crush any defense. Miller looked around the bridge, meeting the eyes of every member of her crew. "It's been an honor serving with you." Then on an open channel to the entire fleet, "All units, final push. Give them everything you've got. Now!" The defensive line didn't retreat. It surged forward. 1,000 ships accelerated directly into the mass of the swarm, weapons firing without pause. It wasn't a tactic. It was a statement. It was the final barrier between hope and extinction. General Vance roared a challenge as his dreadnought tore apart around him. Meredith ordered ramming speed even as her shields failed. The energy commanders burned their cores to extinction to provide one last burst of power to Allied weapons. And the humans, those persistent, impossible humans, maintained coordination until the very last second, until the last ship, until the last breath. 100%, Dr. Foster screamed. "Star trap ready to fire." Miller didn't hesitate. Fire. The array activated. The energy of 3 white dwarfs. Power gathered over billions of years, focused through the central crystal into a beam of pure annihilation. It wasn't a laser or plasma. It was something more fundamental, a pulse that existed simultaneously in every dimension, designed specifically to shatter neural coordination on a quantum scale. The beam tore through the swarm instantly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the biomechanical entities began to fail, not by exploding, but like puppets with their strings cut. The collective consciousness that unified them disintegrated level by level, every layer of coordination collapsing until only billions of individual components remained, drifting without purpose or direction. Within minutes, the greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced became a field of drifting scrap. Absolute silence filled the command center. Then, an explosion of celebration. Officers from 12 different species hugged, cried, and laughed with relief and disbelief. Lyra looked at the sensors, hardly able to believe it. They won. Against all odds, they won. Miller collapsed into her chair, exhaustion finally overtaking the adrenaline. Parker approached her, offering water which she took with trembling hands. "Casualty count?" she requested in a low voice. Parker hesitated. "Commander, maybe we should—" "Now, Lieutenant." He checked the data, his face turning pale. 63% of the engaged forces were destroyed or severely damaged, including General Vance's flagship. "We're not picking up any life signs." Miller closed her eyes, a silent tribute to the fallen. "Prepare a full list of names. Every single one will be remembered, every sacrifice honored." In the following days, as the galaxy processed both victory and grief, fundamental changes began. The High Council was dissolved by a unanimous vote. In its place, they established the Galactic Accord based on true equality. Every species, one voice. Every world, equal protection. The humans didn't ask for a privileged position, but it was offered unanimously. They were named the Guardians, a formal title recognizing 40,000 years of silent service. Commander Miller, in a ceremony broadcast across 1,000 worlds, accepted with her characteristic pragmatism. "We didn't fight for titles or recognition. We fought because it was right. But we accept this responsibility with humility and the determination to never fail the trust you've placed in us." Lyra, promoted to Chief Archivist, was given the task of documenting everything for future generations. She started with the cylinder that had begun it all. She removed the word myth from the file. In its place, she wrote allies. She added new records: the Battle of the Titan System, the sacrifice of Admiral Taylor, General Vance's last stand, the Star Trap. Thousands of names of heroes from 12 species who proved that together they were unbeatable. Months later, at a memorial ceremony in the Edge Corridor, monuments were raised for the fallen. Lyra watched representatives from every species leave offerings, tears flowing freely. Miller walked up to her, looking out into the space where so many had fallen. "Do you think they knew?" Miller asked softly. "That their sacrifice would change everything?" Lyra considered the question. "I think they knew it was necessary. And for true heroes, that has always been enough." Miller smiled, sad but genuine. "You've learned well, Archivist. You're starting to think like a human." "Is that a compliment?" "The highest one I can give." They stood in silence for a while, honoring the dead and quietly celebrating the living. The galaxy had changed, not just technologically or politically, but fundamentally. Species that had been divided for millennia discovered that together they were extraordinary. And at the heart of it all was the lesson the humans taught through action, not words. True strength doesn't come from individual power, but from the courage to defend the impossible together. Lyra returned to the Great Library weeks later, carrying data crystals containing the full history. She walked through the familiar halls to Sector Omicron, where it had all started. She placed the records in the central archive, ensuring that future generations would know the truth. Not a sanitized myth, but the raw reality of war, sacrifice, and triumph. As she sealed the last crystal, she noticed something. On the wall where the original cylinder had been discovered, a new holographic panel had been installed. It displayed a simple message in 12 languages. They returned not as conquerors, but as saviors. "We will not forget." Lyra smiled, touching the panel gently. The story of the Terrans, the forgotten ones who never forgot, was complete. But the story of the United Galaxy was only just beginning, and it would be glorious. End of story. If the tenacity of the Joint Fleet and the sacrifice of the heroes of the Edge Corridor inspired you, consider sharing this chronicle from the galactic frontier, because stories of courage in the face of the impossible deserve to be told across the stars, so that future generations understand that unity has always been our greatest weapon against the darkness of the void.